Have you ever felt completely uncertain if the choice you're making for your child is the right choice? Have you ever yelled at your child, lost your cool, vowed you'd never do so again, and then found yourself doing it again a few days or weeks later? If so, I want you to know we have all been there. Every parent has been there. When we become parents, it causes us to be under immense pressure. We feel that pressure because we care. It doesn't have to harm us. Pressure can be good. It can be motivating. After all, pressure makes diamonds. Welcome to the Parent Doctor podcast. I'm Dr. Marissa Caudill, an adult and child psychiatrist, wife, and mother of two. If you're here, I'm going to guess that you're like me. You want to be the best possible parent for your children. You don't want to settle for just being a good enough parent. Maybe you're like me and that you're determined to be a cycle breaker within your own family. Here at the Parent Doctor podcast, I blend neuroscience, psychology, and spirituality to give you the tools to confidently grow as a parent. Because it's not just about raising our kids. It's about reflecting, evolving, and becoming the firm but loving parents that our kids need to thrive. I believe in the power of intentional, mindful parenting to help our children see our lives as examples of a life worth living. That might mean making some tough decisions in your life about your relationships, your work, your friendships, your habits. Can that be hard? Yeah, sure. But anything really worth doing is not easy. And that is how we're going to reverse the teen mental health crisis our kids are facing. By leading with love, embracing failure, modeling resilience, and creating homes filled with understanding and connection. So whether you're a seasoned parent or just starting this incredible adventure, you are in the right place. If you find value here, I'd be so grateful if you could follow, rate, and share this podcast. It's a simple way to help more parents discover the support they need on their parenting journey. Thank you for joining me. Let's get started. It is my pleasure today to welcome Dr. Irena Smith. She is an author, a mom of three, a former Stanford lecturer, right? And admissions officer, and a former private college admissions coach. I recently had her join me at the book club for October 2024, where we talked about the book Never Enough by Jennifer Breheny Wallace. And she had lots of amazing things to share with us about toxic achievement culture, you're in Palo Alto?
Palo Alto, in the Stanford University shadow.
Yes. So in that book, she talks about super zips, and Palo Alto is definitely one of those super zips, right? It's like a high achieving, wealthy zip code with lots of people who are ambitious, who are raising kids who are ambitious. And it's not that that is bad, but it can very easily turn toxic in a way that can be very bad for our kids. So yeah, we have a plan to talk about kind of the college admissions process together and what we're facing as parents in 2024 in a world that seems more competitive than ever. And I guess it is technically more competitive, right? What is the reality? Like, how much more competitive is it to get into a top college today than it was 20 years ago? Do you know?
Significantly. So it's funny that you picked the number 20 because roughly 20 years ago, I was finishing up at the undergraduate admissions office at Stanford, where the admit rate at the time was a whopping 12.5%. They had about 25,000 applicants for 2,100 spots. And now they have over 60,000 applicants for that same number of spots, which puts their admit rate somewhere around 3%. So, which is probably slightly higher than being struck by lightning, but not significantly so. So, yes, it's more competitive, but to me, the question is really, why is that? And why does it seem so important to so many people? And I'm not just talking about Stanford, I'm talking about other universities and colleges that people perceive as elite or prestigious or guaranteed to create a safe and secure future for your child and to function as you will, shameless self-promotion, the golden ticket to a happy life, which is not always true.
I have really strong feelings about that. And yes, we should totally promote you. So Irena is an amazing author. She wrote a book called The Golden Ticket that is autobiographical about her life raising her kids, but told in such a brilliant and creative way through the prompts of college admissions essays. I loved it. Highly recommend. Go and get it. I'll put the link down below in the show notes. And she's also an excellent, entertaining writer with her Substack, which is called The College Curmudgeon's Guide to College Admissions. Did I get that right?
Curmudgeon's Guide to College Admissions.
Okay. And so you can find the link to her Substack also in the show notes for today. So follow her. She is worth listening to and reading. She has wonderful ideas on this topic. But so, yeah, I think it's absolutely true that in these super zip communities, especially, parents have this mindset that it's kind of, like you said, Yale or jail. Like if my kid doesn't do, like if all of this isn't worth it. And why? Because we start investing, let's be honest, the parents in my private school community started thinking about their kids' college before they started kindergarten. I still remember at my daughter's kindergarten birthday, the year she turned 6, a mom saying like, well, my kid's going to go to Stanford. And she was only like half joking. I mean, there's really this idea that by starting early, by doing this, by getting them into this best elementary school, I am doing my part to make sure that my kid gets into the best thing, the best school for their future. And I think it all stems from an understandable desire to have control over the outcome that we had this child, and we want to have control over who they become. We want to open all the doors that we can, which again is coming from a place of love. That's understandable. But the hard part is accepting that we really can't control as much as we think we can. And I loved in your book talking about that. Like you had something about if there's a 5% chance of rain, you don't bring your umbrella wherever you're going. But if the college tells you your kid has a 5% chance of getting in, or Stanford, it's 3, right? And still reasonable, logical people still think, oh, but my kid will get in.
Right. It's people are thinking if a college has a 5% acceptance rate, then people are not thinking, wow, I have a 95% chance of working really hard in high school and sacrificing my childhood and then having it all be for naught if the goal is to get into one of the top 20 colleges and universities in the US. And instead, everybody is thinking, why not me? It could be me. I mean, why not you pulling the golden ticket from the chocolate bar, as we see in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, right? So we all believe that, accept that. And there's a reason the book is called The Golden Ticket, ironically, is that for 4 of the 5 children who are accepted, to turn a phrase, into the Chocolate Factory, they don't do so well. They end up being physically and emotionally traumatized and sucked into like chocolate tubes and kidnapped by squirrels. And I mean, all kinds of things happen that are not great. So that brings up obviously the question of fit, like if what happens once you're accepted. And I've actually spoken recently to a clinical psychologist who practices in the Bay Area, and half her practice is, and this is the consequences, obviously, of this kind of thinking. Half her patient population are stressed out teenagers in high school who are completely crushing or being crushed by the weight of APs and extracurriculars that they don't really care that much about, and kind of everybody's free-floating expectation and anxiety. Plus, they're also equally anxious parents. There's no villain in this. And then half her patient population is what she calls baby adults. So the students who have been admitted to Stanford and who have been working toward this goal practically their entire life. And all of a sudden they're having a now what moment. Possibly they don't have coping skills to deal with their roommate or do their laundry because their entire family has invested in their academic success such that they don't ever make their bed, they don't ever wash the dishes, they don't ever do basic teenage chore things, all of which come home to roost, to mix my metaphors, when they go to college and have to live independently.
Absolutely. Oh, I have so many thoughts about this. And so much of it, I really feel strongly, my work as the parent doctor is to start earlier. I mean, I know we're talking about college admissions, so most people who might tune into this are going to be people who have kids in the latter part of high school, but really this is relevant to parents who have kids as young as preschool, but especially in the 5 to 12 range, because the mindset that you as a parent begin to instill and impart to your child before they hit all this high pressure academic stuff in high school is key. I mean, they really need to have that solid identity that their worth is not tied to their grades or to their test score or to their college acceptance. Because otherwise, what I see as a child psychiatrist is kids devastated and suicidal.
Mhm.
And often getting to the dream college and completely losing it, like wheels falling off the bus, move back home, living in mom and dad's basement or something like that. And that ultimately leads to this big chasm between, I'm using that word, it was schism.
Yeah. Yeah.
But big chasm between like who they think they should be and who they really are, that feels to them like a devastating gap. And that,
Exactly.
if there's anything I want my kids to have as a result of having been my child, it's, I hope when they become an adult, there's no such chasm, that like who they are is enough. And
Mhm.
that it's going to be good enough for any situation. And because they know that, they can constantly be pushing their comfort zone and doing more at the rate that feels right for them. And that's going to be different at different points in their life.
Exactly.
But yeah, I think we really want to encourage people to consider, well, I think first of all, acknowledge the pressure that you and your children might be under,
Mhm.
not explicitly, but just by the peer group that you have, the school that you're attending. I was sharing with you, my child goes to a private school here in Los Angeles. Both of my kids do. It's an excellent school. I love it. They really take a holistic approach. It's not just about academics, even though they do push academics because it is a school for highly gifted kids. But because, again, it's these like parents who want the best for their kids, and many of them are affluent parents who can afford to pay the private school tuition. So they do everything because they can do everything to try to put their kid ahead, including like getting their kid tutoring in math in kindergarten when they're not instantly in the highest math group or the highest reading group or whatever it is. So again, with no malicious intention, just with love and a desire to help and the ability to do so because they have the means, comes this pressure. And through our actions, a sense that our kids pick up on, which what we value is really their high achievement. And I think you and I have both seen this from the kids, that even though we may feel as parents, oh no, I love my child, it's not about the achievement, it's not about the outcome, but what they pick up on and what they hear from the choices we make, from the actions, from the tutors we hire, coaches we hire, whatever it is achievement that matters, and their worth is tied to that achievement. What do you think?
So I think that that is absolutely on the nose, that there's a focus on what are the measurable indices of success, and are you measuring up to those indices or not? And if not, let's make sure we narrow the gap as much as possible by putting resources toward doing that. And I think that, again, you're absolutely right. It doesn't come from a bad place. Nobody is maliciously twirling their villain mustache saying, how can I mess up my children today? But I think that in with the love comes this undercurrent of fear. And I think when parents start acting out of fear rather than out of love, or fear masquerading as love, I think is when things really start to get sticky. And I really, really wish, and it's hard to verbalize it maybe, but I wish that more people would try, that parents would have conversations with their kids about goals that go beyond getting into this school or getting into this other school or getting into this prestigious internship or summer program. Because if the goal is to be an engineer or an inventor or a filmmaker or somebody who studies the fiber arts, there are multiple pathways to that, some of which may not even include college. And if the goal is to get into a school with a 3.5% admit rate, that would be a little bit like me, a grown up, saying, my goal is to get George Clooney to notice me and leave a mall. And I could have that goal. There's a non-0% chance that he might, but there's also a higher chance that he might call security. And there's also a higher than zero chance that my mental health will suffer. Because if the goal is hinged on like a concrete thing, there's a very high chance that that concrete thing is either not obtainable or is obtainable and is not going to be what you think
Right.
it is.
Yeah, so I've been thinking a lot, and next month's book is called Thrivers by Michelle Borba. I don't know if you've read it. She's
Oh,
a
but I am adding that to my list.
it was actually written before Never Enough. I think it was
Okay.
from 2021. And you can tell, we were just talking before we started recording here about like technology and AI and cell phones, smartphones, all this stuff, right? Like you can tell it's written before because we've learned more collectively about the impact of the last 10 years and how much they've changed childhood and parenthood. But this book, she really talks about something that I'm very passionate about, which is making sure that we're explicit with our kids and talking about what we value and what our kids value and the character traits to develop. Because it's not just about like getting the grade. And I see so many parents who, again, if your kid fails to do as well as you would like them to, or isn't the best at something at school, right? That triggers anxiety in you and in your kid because now you feel like, oh, so and so's better. I'm not as good. But if we can emphasize instead of the outcome, which we're never going to be the top, even if your kid is the top, they're not going to be the top forever. Okay. Like Simone Biles is amazing, but in a few years, we're going to be talking about some other amazing gymnast, right? Like you can never maintain top status forever, no matter how good you are at anything. So far more important than being the best is being a good person who likes themselves and who brings value to the world. So I think that conversation, like to have that explicitly, is something that we used to do in past generations more than we do now. And it's more important now than ever. Because again, it's not so much about the grades. It's about like being a person who cares to do well in your classes, not because I'm your mom and I told you so, and I'm going to be really disappointed if you don't, but because you want to be the kind of person who
It comes from inside. And I think that one of the things that I used to see all the time when I was counseling students is the question, what does Stanford want to see? What kinds of students are they looking for? Meaning, I will be that. I will be a cipher and fill me with whatever it is that Stanford will find appealing, which is a terrible way to think, period. But particularly during a developmental phase when kids are really supposed to be figuring out who they are and not who they think Stanford or Harvard wants them to be. And that kind of extrinsic motivation, I'm doing this because Stanford will not look at anybody with fewer than 10 APs without any regard for the fact that you may not be suited to take 10 APs. That just may not be something you're ready for now or ever. And that's fine, as opposed to what you were talking about, developing kind of a mindset of not being the best, but being the best version of who you are, independent of what other people might think of that.
yeah. And really related to that is allowing your child and allowing yourself to play to your child's natural strengths, even if those aren't the things that are going to lead to the best grades and the best CV to apply to Stanford or Harvard with. Because ultimately, they're going to be the best version of themselves if you let them blossom in the direction that they're meant to blossom.
So I'm really glad you brought that up because I think last year at some point I wrote a Substack about, he's now an adult, but our friend's son who is completing his master's at NYU's Tisch for stage design. And he's studying with the professor who designed, among other things, the set for Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. So he is living his best life. He's there with a full free ride, so he's not paying tuition. And when he was in high school, I've known this family for a long time. His mom cornered me at a social event and said in a horrified whisper, Irena, Jake doesn't have any APs, and I'm worried essentially he's going to live in a box under a bridge and be poor and unhappy. And I tried to explain to her that even though it is not the Palo Alto way not to take any APs, he wasn't taking them because he had a number of learning differences and it wasn't his thing. What he was doing passionately was lighting design in his school's very good theater department, and also pursuing his passion as an amateur astral photographer. So he ended up graduating from Brandeis. He designed like phenomenally beautiful sets. If you look up the Substack, it's called We Are Such Stuff as Dreams Are Made On, and it has some of his photographs of the sets that he's designed as well as the astral photography. They are brilliant. He is a superstar at NYU Tisch. His mom was bursting with pride, needless to say. She was saying that in high school, he felt so beaten down and so like everybody else is taking APs and I'm not. What's wrong with me? So then now he's the person everybody comes to, like for advice, for insight, for can I run this by you? And I did a long Zoom interview with him. And I was like, okay, can I just ask you a realistic, yucky adult question, which is, okay, stage design in New York, great. Like, are you going to be able to eat after you're done with graduate school? And apparently, yes. And he's going to be able to eat quite well because he's already in the union. There's health insurance, there's a safety net for who. I think actors have it harder, but people who are behind the scenes professionals actually always have a steady supply of jobs. He's thinking of doing like a design collective with some of his classmates where they're going to be collaborating on presumably Broadway and off-Broadway productions. And I was like, and this is a kid who 10 years ago, audible gasp, did not have a single AP. And look at him now.
Well, I want to give some credit to his parents because this is in Palo Alto, right? So even though they felt that anxiety, they had enough. This is something that you can't teach it. You just have to have it. You have to trust your gut. And we all know that we love our kids as they are. We do deeply, but like it's easy to kind of convince yourself that you're wrong. They didn't let the world convince them that they were wrong. They trusted that like he's got something, he's passionate about something, and I'm going to trust that he's going to figure it out. And clearly they were able to convey that in a way that he was able to have faith that he would get there eventually. Maybe again, it's not a linear perfect path, but he got there. And I think this is where you said something earlier about anxiety masquerading as love.
Oh, fear. Yeah, fear masquerading.
Fear masquerading as love. I feel like so often in that scenario, what will happen is that the fear the parent has, and it starts even younger sometimes. Like I've talked to people this one woman talked my ear off at an event that my kids were like dabbling in some martial arts. And she was like, can I talk to you? You're a child psychiatrist. Like my kid, she didn't have a thing. She wasn't like passionate about something. And I was like, but she's like 8. But she was like, oh, we tried swimming and we tried soccer and now we're trying martial arts. And like, she just has no, and she's thinking that this is pathological, that her like 8-year-old doesn't yet have a passion. And I think a lot of people assume that their kid should have this passion at a really young age. And some people do. That's great. Tiger Woods with his golf club at 2 or whatever. There are people like that, but the vast majority of people are not like that.
Well, and that's the pathology, right? The pathology is thinking that they should be like that. And I want to go back to something you said earlier that is so important. The crucial importance of trusting your gut, because you already know what you need to know as a parent. And if something feels icky and if something is provoking anxiety, there's probably a reason for that. Like your body already tells you everything you need to know. And sometimes it feels counterintuitive to just kind of let your kid do their thing. But unless their thing is like petty vandalism or other crimes, I think it's fine to do that. And as an 8-year-old, I can tell you, I certainly did not have a special interest or special skill. I was not tumbling off of furniture like little Simone Biles, to use that example, probably was. And that's the thing, is the people who have a passion or a skill or a talent, you usually see that. You don't have to enroll them in activities. It's usually the thing that they're doing or seeking out from a very young age. There was a girl on my kids' summer swim league swim team who swam like an adult and she was like 4. And the coach called her freakishly buoyant because he was literally, I cannot submerge her. Like she swam butterfly like an adult. And it was very uncanny because she was this like teeny tiny thing. And yet she's doing this like balletically graceful thing and swimming faster than most teenagers. And you can't like put that on someone. You can't try swim lessons and see if they develop into a Michael Phelps. They will usually tell you. And if they're not telling you, maybe just let them figure it out because their big interest right now may be lunch or playing Minecraft or something that is much more immediate and much less enticing looking to parents, but that's who they are.
So, how do we manage our anxiety if our kid is much more? I'm laughing because when they did at our kids' school, they used to interview them and they'd ask them in like kindergarten and first grade, like, what's your favorite part of your school day? And my son used to say lunch, and my daughter says recess. And so I'm like, great. I love academic children, but I also know it's okay in first grade to like lunch and recess. Like, that's actually authentic and realistic. Like if they're saying, well, I like math, and they're probably saying that because they think that's what I want to hear. Although there are kids who probably do really like math.
And great.
And that's great for them, but my kids are not those kids. And so it's okay. And if I push them too hard to make them think that in order to meet my expectations, they need to say they like math, or they need to work hard, or they need to do these things, it's just the wrong impetus. It needs to be an inherent, innate drive, not me pulling them, but them pushing themselves. I don't know how, I feel like sometimes I speak and I feel like I'm talking in a way that could easily be misconstrued in a way opposite to what I mean. So I'm trying to convey what I'm trying to say in a more way.
No,
I do want them to have drive. I'm not saying that I want them to be lazy, but I want them to have drive because they understand what lights them up, not because they have fear that if they don't show drive, I'm going to be disappointed in them.
and I think there's a balance between exposing them to experiences that may help them figure out like, oh, I really like this, because how would you know if your kid likes swimming or not if you never put them in a pool? But like, I'll give you an example because swimming keeps coming up with my own 3 kids. So my oldest son, who was diagnosed with autism when he was 2, never really bothered to learn how to swim, was, I say this with great love, was an ugly dog paddler where we kind of did this and could stay afloat and that was it. And then we joined swim club in the neighborhood and they had a summer swim league. And when he was 10, he saw practice and he said, I would like to be on the swim team. And I was like, you don't even know how to swim. And the coach said, if he practices with the 6 and unders, he can be on the swim team. And I was like, well, that's a deal breaker right there. And to everyone's great surprise, he agreed. Fortunately, he was very small. And so he blended in with the 6 and unders. And he went to practice every single day. It was his choice. The lifeguard once told me when I came to swim laps that he saw Jordan there, like just swimming laps and practicing his flip turn. And he went from an ugly dog paddle at the beginning of the summer, where it would take him like a minute and a half to swim 50 yards, to swimming 50 yards in 32 seconds at the end of swim season, which I can't even do, not that I'm a great swimmer, like with a racing dive and a flip turn and all the things. Nobody made him. Like, he asked for swim lessons. He went to the pool by himself and practiced. My other 2 kids would go mostly to socialize with their swim team friends, which was fine. And it's funny that you say your kid's favorite part of school was recess and lunch. There's a team video of the kids where they were all being interviewed about what they loved about swim team. And they're all like, I love the butterfly. I love winning. My daughter, who was like 6 at the time, has a giant lollipop in her mouth and like all this candy. And she goes, I love the yummy, yummy candy at the snack bar. I went, yep.
Related to my daughter.
That's my kid.
Are you a parent who wants to read all the parenting books and you have maybe a growing list or stack on your nightstand, but somehow you just never seem to find the time to get to them? If so, I totally relate to you and I want you to know I'm here to help. Every month on the 3rd Wednesday, I read, summarize, and present a parenting book that I have chosen that I think is a great one. And I do this via Zoom. If you'd like to get into the Empowered Parent Book Club, go to theparentdoctor.com/book club. This is totally free. It's a public service that I provide. And everyone who signs up gets access not just to the replay in case they can't make it to the live Zoom, but also to an actionable PDF that I create custom for each book that we read. So I would love to have you. This is a growing community now of over 200 members. These are like-minded, engaged, energized, supported parents who want to be more empowered for the sake of their kids. If you'd like to join us, again, please go to theparentdoctor.com/book club. See you there.
And so for them, it was like they didn't hate swimming, but it was a social experience. Like they played cards with the other kids between their swim events. They sometimes won, and that was great, and sometimes didn't, and that was also great. And I think that kids could be getting different things out of the different activities. But again, I think it's very worthwhile to talk to them about, why are you doing this? Does it spark joy? Like if we took, to use a Marie Kondo, like if we took it off your schedule, would you be relieved, or would you be like, oh, I missed that?
Right. It's so obvious as we're talking about this. I'm thinking they're no different than us, right? Like I can play pickleball for fun. I have no interest in playing professional level tennis or really like upping my tennis game. So it's not that it's any different for kids than it is for adults. There are things we do just because we enjoy it. And then there are things that we are, and we can't explain why, like passionately committed to wanting to do better and better, lots and lots. And we each have that fire within us about something. And I think the panic is, we really, especially in America, right? We celebrate those stories of like Tiger Woods and Simone Biles, the people who had that passion early and followed it to the top. But I think the far more common story is a passion that starts later and doesn't go all the way to the top, that just becomes something that's an enjoyable part of your life. Like maybe you really like to read, or maybe you really like to have a book club, or maybe you really like to sew, or whatever it is, art, who knows? Like you have a hobby. And that's fine. Like that's a part of a happy life. It doesn't have to be the thing that's, I was talking to some parents in my office hours last week about, even with young kids, like as young as 6, it's kind of in your mind as a parent, an ambitious parent, like, well, should they do fencing? Isn't that more likely to get them into college versus like the local taekwondo studio? Isn't that kind of just mundane, boring, and like every kid does some martial arts? Like, don't I want them to stand out and be a little exotic? But the reality is you have to find what lights you up. And I love the story of Misty Copeland, the New York ballerina. Like she didn't start dancing till she was 14. So there's also exceptions to the rule about when late bloomers, people who find dancing much later, or even in adulthood. So many stories like that. Yeah. So I think if you're a parent and you're anxious about your kid, ask yourself, like, is it really true, this story that I'm telling myself, that it's a big red flag that they don't have the thing that they're great at or they're really interested in by this point? Because it's probably more likely normal that they're going to find the thing that lights them up through their natural exploration. And it's just our job to encourage them to keep pursuing that, even if it's not the thing. Like your friend's son, who was really into what is astrophotography? Like
astrophotography, like he
planets
would go on camping trips with like this incredible like telescopes and photo equipment, and take these gorgeous pictures of stars and galaxies and the Milky Way. And I mean, his pictures are beautiful.
So I think that's super cool, but like I would never think to do that. I like looking at those pictures, but I would never think, or even I've never even Googled, like, how do you make those pictures?
That's how that started. I know that he was volunteering our local community college, which is excellent, by the way, and where my daughter went before she transferred to a 4-year college. They have a planetarium. And that was one of his high school things, was he actually was a volunteer docent at the planetarium. So I suspect it maybe started that his parents brought him when he was a little kid, and he was like, oh, this is cool. I should have asked him that in the interview, but it just was something he was drawn to. And I think that's where it's a parent's job to expose your kid to interesting things, but I don't think it's your job to expose them to interesting things with the expectation that this is going to be the thing and they're going to be really good at it. So there's a difference between, in the same way that like when you feed them presumably you don't put a plate in front of them with different kinds of healthy foods and say, you're going to sit here until you finish that plate, which, by the way, my mother's mom did to her. And to this day, my mom hates soup because she was like, nope, I'm just going to sit there for 3 hours. So it's that, I think it's actually not a bad analogy in that you can't make somebody love something. You can show them it. And that's after that, it's really up to them what they do to it or with it.
You can show them it, and in the case of food, but I think also in the case of activities, you can also remind them that for food, the average person has to try a new thing 10 times before they really can say whether they like it. Because when something's new, especially a food, right, it's a new sensory experience.
Right.
And your body and brain are kind of hardwired to say no to new things because you're trying to survive and we want to keep to what's safe. Similarly, with new activities and new hobbies, new interests, you have to stick with it for a time. So like this is something that comes up often. Like say your kid decides, yes, I will sign up for swim or soccer or some like seasonal thing. And then 2 weeks in, they're like, I don't want to do this anymore. In that case, again, not in every case, but I think it's important. The approach that I take is kind of listen and hear what my child has to say, repeat back so they know that I hear them, like the reasons why they don't want to do it, and then emphasize the characterological trait that I want to emphasize, which is like, okay, but you made a commitment to this team. If it's a team sport, your friends and peers are counting on you. Do you want to be the kind of person who doesn't follow through on your commitment, or do you want to be the kind of person who sticks through the commitment and then decides this isn't for me? And then give your child the room to make that decision, and hopefully they make the right decision. But also when it comes to other things, like if they do get passionate about astral photography or piano or dance or whatever it is, at some point when you start a new hobby, you initially have, I'm trying to imagine a graph here, you initially learn a lot and your rate of momentum goes up fast. And then you reach a plateau where like to get that last little bit of that asymptote takes so much effort, like that 10,000 hours. If you have to be doing something for 10,000 hours to become a master, the first 5,000 are like a really steep slope, and then the next are like this. So I think that's another part of the conversation as parents that we do need to be prepared to have with our kids, that it's not just about like show them the things and let them pick and let them quit whenever they want. It's also about show them the things and have them know it's not just going to be easy going all the way along. Once they find the thing that they like, it's going to be hard. Like it's not always the case that when you like something, because often kids do like things that come easy to them or that they're naturally good at, like the swimming with that 4-year-old girl that you mentioned. But at some point, they're not going to be the best anymore. And then it's going to be shocking and hard for them to continue. And we have to let them know that.
And then the question is, do you like it enough to do it just because you're doing it and not necessarily because you're winning all the prizes or all the races? The other thing I just want to go back to, because you said, what can parents do to reduce the anxiety? I think what you mentioned about just the reality check is a story that I'm telling myself, that it's pathological not to have a passion when you're 8 years old. Is that actually true? I would go a little bit further than that and ask, like, where is that information coming from? And for me, that would be two places. One is, who is your peer group? If you're running with a crowd that's all they talk about, and the expectation is everybody's child has a spike or a hook or something, and everybody is comparing tutors and coaches and achievements, maybe it's time to find new friends, because I would be willing to bet that these are not peers that make you feel good about yourself or your child. And you probably come home and take that anxiety directly or indirectly out on your child and your family. And then secondly, to ask yourself, is the phone call coming from inside the house? Like, did you have a spike or a hook when you were 8? And if yes, great. And your kid may not be a mini you, and that has to be okay if they're not. Or were you not? And then I think it just raises all kinds of questions. And I think that was one of the really valuable things for me about writing the book as a memoir, is it really made me think about, how was I raised? What values was I raised with? by my parents who came here from the Soviet Union when I was 9 and who had very set ideas about what success meant and what it meant to arrive, what it meant to reach some kind of pinnacle. And we had a lot of tension about their desire for me to become an engineer, which again was coming from a place of absolute love, but also absolute willful ignorance of my math and science grades, and also willful ignorance of the fact that I had zero interest in engineering. So there's, I think, a lot of self-examination that is hard to do and that people often don't do as parents. But I think that thinking back to how you were parented is so, so useful.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's hard, right? And when you have a child, okay, when you are a child within a family, your parents are kind of these fixed puzzle pieces and you adapt to fit them, right? Because you need them. When you're a child and a minor, you're dependent on your parents to survive, literally. So like you have to find a way to appease them, to please them, to do what they want you to do in order to keep getting the things that you need from them. It's a survival tactic. And then you become an adult and your puzzle piece is kind of molded. And then you have a child and you start molding your child to that same. And we do have the ability to realize that we can change the edges of our puzzle piece. Like, and maybe the edges of your puzzle piece aren't what you really want. Maybe these stories you've been telling yourself about who you have to be successful aren't even true for you. And so you might need to do some pretty deep soul searching, which is scary. It's really scary.
One just quick thing I was going to say to tie back to what we were talking about before we started recording, the sort of epic growth in AI and technology that we don't even fully understand yet. One of the things that I find drive a lot of parents' anxiety is this belief that how they succeeded will be how their kids succeed. And I think many of them, even those who work in tech, and I say this as a fairly tech ignorant person, but I think that I have data to back this up. Many of the jobs that existed when the students' parents were coming of age are not going to exist anymore. AI does a perfectly good job coding and it doesn't need breaks or snacks or weekends off. And what is going to, I think, unless we create just really amazing AI, which will become fully human, the softer skills, sort of the ability to think critically, empathy, iconoclastic, out of the box thinking that's not logical, that's not like do A, B, and C and you'll get result D. That's what makes us human. That's what makes us behave in maddening, irrational ways. But it's also what makes us produce really beautiful art and painting and music and the things for which we live, arguably.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, my son and I were just talking about that this morning. Okay, unrelated. But yesterday I had a mother-daughter day with my daughter, and we watched this movie called The Wish Dragon, which is about this dragon that gives, it's like Aladdin, right? He gives 3 magic wishes. And so my daughter I was asking her, what would be your 3 wishes? And of course she's 7. So she's like, I would want 1 million puppies and $1 million. And then I had to interrupt her, like, you might want more than $1 million because 1 million puppies, it's going to cost more than $1 million to find homes for 1 million puppies. So she's like, you're right, Mom. Yeah. Infinite dollars. And I was like, there you go. That's good. And then she wanted 1 million friends. And then she looked at me and she's like, no, I want all the mommy time. And I was like, oh, it's the best. But I was with my son today and he was asking me, what would be your 3 wishes? And I was like, oh, it's a good question. And so I said, I would want people to be able to really take the perspective of another person. And then I was like, I guess, yeah, also infinite money, but just not just for me. I would want kind of infinite money for everyone. And then we started thinking about what would that mean? Like if everyone had infinite money, like the world would not, he's like, yeah, well, people wouldn't work for money. So what would we do? It was such an interesting conversation to just imagine, like if everything was different than it is right now, if we all just worked together to make the world better and we all had enough. And he's like, but then, it was an interesting thing. This is, but it's the same idea. I feel like the conversation that I have with him about AI and the future, because it leads to those same like, boom, explosive, expansive ideas about what the world is going to be. even driving a car. Like my daughter is 7. I don't know if she's ever going to need to drive a car. I think cars are going to be self-driving. I think my son's young enough that probably in 4 years he's still going to have to get a license, but like it's definitely within the next 10 years that the cars are going to be self-driving. We've got them around Santa Monica right now, these driverless taxis called Waymo from Google.
We
So
have that.
it's all coming. And like you were saying, like the AI can do programming without needing brakes, without needing health insurance, without needing all these things. Same for the truck drivers, and same for restaurants. Increasingly, you scan a thing to order, and someone brings you the food. There's no social interaction. But I do really think, therefore, the value of learning how to deeply communicate with people is going to be greater. The value of really being able to understand another person's body language and have empathy and connect, that's going to be greater, because people are going to be hungrier than ever for that. I think our kids, as we were talking about this whole mental health crisis, and the kids who are entering college now, who were on their phones throughout the pandemic before we knew better, like they're craving that connection with each other. And someone told me they're posting on Instagram, like, oh, we had like a dinner party where no one could use their phones. And it was like this novel idea and how fun it was. But it's like the pendulum is going to swing back to realizing like the fun of being alive is being alive and connecting with other human beings. Like that's kind of the whole point. And we've lost sight of that a little bit with all the technology and all that it can bring us.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, how should we wrap this up? I feel like we went all over the place, but it was a great conversation.
I mean, I think that just back to our central themes, which were I've realized over the course of my 18 years as a college counselor that yelling at people to calm down does not actually work at all. So instead of yelling at people to calm down, I think it might be helpful to just throw out, excuse me, the suggestion that maybe just take a beat to think about, why are you anxious? Because I think it's kind of a given that pretty much 99.9% of parents raising teens and often middle schoolers are anxious. Why are you anxious? What are you anxious about? Can you control where your kid gets into college? You know, say your kid is 12, 6 years from now. Probably not. I like my rule of fives. I brought that up, I think, when I was talking to the book group, that will this matter in 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 months, 5 years. I think that in the anxiety of worrying about your kid not having a spike at 8 or a passion, your kid not taking enough classes, your kid's not having the right tutor, we kind of miss like what is happening right now. What are they? And I know it's a huge cliche now to say to be in the moment, but what is happening right now? Who is your kid right now? Where can you meet them where they are right now, and just build on that without an ulterior motive or agenda? That's my 2 cents.
I love it. I think that's great. Yeah. And I guess mine would be related to that. I think I'm very much about like visual analogies. So for me, it's just about like realizing that I'm on a highway and realizing that there are exits. Just because all the other cars are going 80 miles an hour doesn't mean that I can't get off at this exit, and that my child and I can't get off and take the surface streets if we want to.
And sometimes those will be prettier and more interesting than speeding down the highway like a crazy person.
And I actually think there's mounting data that taking an off-ramp is going to be to your mental benefit as a parent, but definitely to your child's mental health benefit, like slowing down. Everything's gone so fast. Kids are under so much pressure. They're processing so much information from so many sources. It's increasingly difficult for them to establish a sense of self and an identity throughout a period of adolescence, which is naturally a period of exploration. But exploration for you and I, like when we were teenagers, was comparing ourselves to the other kids at our school, on our block. It was a small peer group
size. Yeah, it was not
the whole world, and like the best filters of whatever on social media and all these things, and algorithms playing with your mind that you have no control over. So yeah,
I love that for the off ramp. Yeah,
I think take the exit. That's my message, because it's funny, this is kind of full circle for me. So I actually was the first person in my family to go to college. My parents didn't go to college, and I was a top student. I got into Yale in 1995, early action. And I remember seeing my parents come out of the financial aid office, like looking really sad because basically they told my parents like, well, my parents had worked really hard. They'd almost paid off their house. And they were like, well, you'll get out a second home loan. And when the equity is out of your house, then probably by her junior year, she'll get more scholarship aid. So it was like, basically like take everything that you've worked for and liquidate it to pay for Yale. And maybe, I don't know how long later, but that same fall, I got a full ride to Tulane University. And my mom and I went down there to check it out. We were there at Mardi Gras. It wasn't Yale, but it was clearly fine. And I went, and that fall of 1995, some article came out in Newsweek about this young man who had gotten into like University of Michigan's business school, which would have been in-state tuition, but then he also got into Wharton. And so his family, like his little sister was like selling her stuffed animals at a yard sale to like help pay for him to go to Wharton. And it was this whole like, you do what you got to do kind of story. And I wrote a letter to the editor that got published, basically saying like, this is kind of sad for me to think that like he would choose that when I think it's what you do, not where you do it that matters. And I think that I still believe that with all my heart, that it's who you are and what you do and what you learn and the person that you become that matters so much more than where you do it. Now, would I have had different peer groups and maybe bigger connections had I gone to Yale? Probably. Yeah, there probably would have been a higher socioeconomic status peer group at Yale than there was at Tulane University. But I have to say, like, I still became a doctor and I still ended up in residency with people who went to Harvard and MIT and all these top-notch places. Like, I ended up in the same place because I have the same brain and I'm the same.
Exactly it. Yeah, you turned out just fine. And you would have been just fine if you had gone to your local community college and then transferred. And you would have been just fine if any number of other things. But I love that. I love that Tulane came through for you. And I hate that Yale was like, yeah, just give us all our money. It's good.
And in comparison, it's funny now because, right, it seemed like a lot of money back then, but I think it was like, I don't know, $24,000. It was some laughable amount of money now. I'm sure now Yale is what, like 60, 70,000.
Well, I know we're supposed to be wrapping up, but I just want to say one other thing, particularly for parents and students who are thinking about medical school. My best guess is that Tulane treated you like a queen because they gave you a full ride for 4 years based on merit. And my guess is that you had amazing mentorships with professors and you had opportunities that you might not have had at Yale, in spite of there being more socioeconomically advantageous peers. And my guess is that, and I think you would have been just fine at Yale, but there's also a non-0% chance that at Yale you would have been competing against people that would have meant that you did not graduate at the top of your class, that would have made resident or medical school harder to get into. And I tell students this all the time, there is no Harvard discount. You graduate from Harvard with a 3.7, you're not going to get into medical school. The person with the 4.0 from Harvard will, and the person with the 4.0 from University of Nebraska will, but not you. You're going to have a very expensive biology degree.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I think Malcolm Gladwell has a new book talking about that too. That of ultimately choosing the place that's best for you. And you're absolutely right. Like being at that place where I was like the superstar and in the, I forget what it's called, like Dean's Honor something, whatever. I had this scholarship, right, where I was like one of the honor students in an honors dorm, getting direct access to faculty. Like I had opportunities and stood out in a way that I wouldn't have at a place like Yale. Now, that said, again, this is one of those places where I feel like I talk against myself too. I also think it's important to challenge yourself. I will say I was challenged at Tulane. Like, it's not that I took this super easy path. Like, I took hard classes. I got all my pre-med classes done in 2 years so I could do a junior year abroad. I applied to med school a year early. Like, I was on a fast track there. I worked hard. So it's not that you don't want to challenge yourself. It's not that you want to be the big fish in the small pond forever. You want to also make sure that you're positioning yourself to get what you ultimately want. Maybe it was medical school.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. This was awesome. I think this is a great
episode. It was so good to talk to you. I loved our conversation.
Thank you. All right. So everyone check the show notes so you can be on Irena's Substack and be a beneficial reader of all the things that she puts out. It's awesome content. And for all of you who have kids applying to colleges, I hope that it's going well, and feel free to shoot me a message if there's any other topics similar to this that you'd like us to cover. Take care.